As phrases such as post-truth and alternative facts become strangely commonplace, perhaps it's not a surprise that some of the classics of dystopian fiction have made their way back onto the bestseller lists. What does the revived interest in these books say about our current times, and can they offer any insights for us? Let's ask writer and critic Randy Boyagoda. He is also professor of English and principal of the University of St. Michael's College at U of T, and Sue Ann Kelman, professor emeritus at the Ryerson School of Journalism and a one-time regular in these parts on a different program many moons ago.
Yes.
But it's nice to see you again.
Nice
Randy,
to
good
see
to have
you.
you here as well. Let's just read this from Wired Magazine to get us started here. Sheldon, if you would. From the Everything Old is New Again files, bygone dystopian fiction is officially back in vogue. As reported last month, Penguin Random House has seen a 9,500% sales increase for George Orwell's 1984 since Donald Trump's inauguration. That was enough to propel the book to the top spot on Amazon's bestseller list. The publisher also saw enough demand for It Can't Happen Here, Sinclair Lewis's 1935 satirical novel about an authoritarian president, to reissue a paperback edition in December and then double down with a robust second print run in January. Nor is this newfound popularity a reflection of blue state tastes. At Brazos Bookstore in Houston, Texas, General Manager Ben Rybeck says copies of 1984 and other titles are, quote, flying off the shelves. Well, let's get into this and let's ask the obvious question. Is this all about Trump?
It's not all about Trump. I would say things like huge climate change. Those of us who are sponsoring Syrian refugees here are aware that they, until fairly recently, were living nice, normal lives that suddenly disappeared. The North Koreans apparently have nerve gas. There's a lot to be nervous about. But Trump certainly helps, and the search for answers in the face of, say, Kellyanne Conway and her use of the English language is enticing. Orwell did get that spot on, newspeak. Alternative facts, a world where words mean the opposite. Well, the Ministry of Love is the place that's responsible for interrogation and torture. That really seems to anticipate Trump.
Randy, how much of this do you want to put at the doorstep of Donald Trump?
Well, I think the initial response and those numbers that we just saw, especially that 9,500% increase, certainly speak to the response, even the reaction, I think, of kind of ordinary citizens to the reality of this new presidency. And I have to admit, deeply ambivalent feelings about this being the rationale for people reading great works of literature.
How come?
On one level, listen, I'm a novelist, I'm the president of PEN Canada. Any opportunity people have to put down their phones and to stop reading the newspapers and turn to serious literature for a little while is, to my mind, a great thing. But I worry that the desire to read comes out of an ideological confirmation bias. I'm not looking to make sense of this moment. I'm looking to have my sense of this moment confirmed. So I'm turning to dystopic novels that kind of articulate an authoritarian, terrible moment.
Which I'm convinced we're heading towards because
and
of
so
Trump.
Therefore I'm reading literature to say, yes, I'm already right about this.
Well, let's us not do that. Let's us do the open-ended analytical look at things and not presupposed biases. And to do that, let me mention the name Eric Arthur Blair, which for some will mean nothing. For those people, we can say that was George Orwell's real name. He died 46 years old. He was young. He was wounded while fighting in the Spanish Civil War. He lived through World War II and the Cold War in its early stages as well. The time at which he was writing, do you think people today understand that, generally speaking, not in every example, but generally speaking, the world is a much better place today than it was when 1984 was written?
I wouldn't think young people today would be aware of what life was like in England in 1948, which is what he was really writing about with a large dash of Stalinist Russia. In those ways where we live, not the whole world, but where we live is much better. 1984 is North Korea to the life. The deprivation, the constant surveillance, all of that.
Dear leader.
So are people reading it now understanding that? But in the way you read fiction, are you really looking for an exact confirmation of your world? It's true that several American writers have pointed out that our world is much more like Brave New World, the Aldous Huxley dystopian novel, which is distinguished by casual sex, meaningless entertainment, lots of consumerism.
Designer babies.
Yes, it does. Designer babies, absolutely. Social stratification, which does sound a lot like now. The reason I don't think that it's a terribly good novel as a model right now is the authorities are extremely efficient in Brave New World. And what I'm worried about is that, in fact, we have a group of people south of the border who have absolutely no idea how to run a government. So don't look there for answers.
But I guess the overarching point here, Randy, is that by almost every measure you can imagine, life today in 2017 for the largest number of people in the world is unambiguously better than it was in 1948. And yet we are in the midst of this dystopian obsession that somehow the world is an infinitely worse place. I mean, that's just not right, is it?
And let's speak specifically maybe about the First World West, because I think we would make very different arguments about other parts of the world. But in that context, especially, this predates Trump. I mean, if you think about whenever it was a few years ago when The Walking Dead, that zombie TV show, became this remarkable runaway success. Part of it is that it's a really good soap opera. Part of it's really good action film, as it were, action TV. But it also spoke to some deep anxiety, right? Lionel Trilling, the great literary critic, in many ways a kind of a late contemporary of Orwell's, he said, we read literature to capture the hum and buzz of cultural implication. And so what are we talking about right now? But the hum and buzz of our culture these days is anxiety. We live in an age of anxiety, and also by way of Pankaj Mishra's forthcoming book, we live in an age of anger, right? Anger, anxiety. This is the moment we live in, even if we're sitting here having a lovely civilized conversation in a peaceful part of the world, but because of the interpenetration of media, because of the intensification of our media lives, we're so hyper aware of problems that we do feel like things are getting worse. And then again, in a very natural and I think very welcome way, we're turning to literature for some sense of answer or exploration. That's a good thing. I'm just worried about how it kind of plays out.
And I would have to say, it is easy for me, for example, a retired person, to say, yes, life is much better. I think if I were 50 years younger, the sense of anxiety might be more justified. I think that there's a sort of fear that these are the final days of the Roman Empire and life in our first world is about to get worse. And literature is just playing catch up here, because Randy's quite right to mention The Walking Dead, movies like The Hunger Games. Literature and people who read are catching up with the popular culture, which has been obsessed with dystopias and apocalypses for ages. In the 1960s, I remember a spate of films, in the early 70s, Soylent Green, The Omega Man, Fahrenheit 451. All of these movies were about a future world that was going to be a lot worse than the one we're living in.
But the point is, it isn't. And you don't have to be a retired university professor to realize that by every metric, the world is a better place. I mean,
but there's
it
local,
is.
But Donald Trump is the president of the United States. It might not last.
There's also there's a few local iterations where, while I agree with you, in comprehensive terms, the world is a better place. Life expectancy, literacy, all of the indicators suggest as much. But what I think we're noticing would be an intensification of two very dissimilar experiences: total security and comfort, and then precarity side by side. I'll give you one example that comes to mind in thinking about our conversation today, and it's P.D. James' novel turned into a movie, Children of Men, which came out maybe about 8 years ago now. And what I remember there is it's a movie that posits a future in which the world has stopped having babies. So there's a sterility question, but people are camped in, there are refugee camps everywhere in first world cities.
Is this the Clive Owen movie?
Yes, Clive Owen, that's right,
yes.
and Julianne Moore.
Yeah.
Right? And I'm thinking about The Jungle, that space in Calais, just south of the Channel, and the terrible, so there's a New Yorker article about it in a recent issue that was very, very moving. This idea that you could kind of drive by in your, in your Volvo and see this intense, terrible situation for so many migrants. Try telling them the world is in a better spot. I mean, one might argue, yes, because you're that much closer, but a movie like Children of Men visualizes that for us 8 years ago.
And there is some sense of that. The Robert Conquest idea that in the world that we live in is like driving in a limo through a very dangerous slum. I think the sense of how dangerous it could become and how much of the world is in a mess because of the media, as you pointed out, intrudes far more than it used to. We know what's happening in the world. It seems much closer. You see it in your living room.
Well, and in fairness, I'm going to follow up with David Frum, who certainly is of the view, as you are, that it is a sign of the apocalypse being upon us that the 45th president turned out to be who he turned out to be. Here's David Frum writing on the dangers of the Trump presidency. The grand utopian visions of the 19th century have passed out of fashion. The nightmare totalitarian projects of the 20th century have been overthrown or have disintegrated, leaving behind only outdated remnants, North Korea, Cuba. What is spreading today is repressive kleptocracy, led by rulers motivated by greed rather than by the deranged idealism of Hitler or Stalin or Mao. Such rulers rely less on terror and more on rule twisting, the manipulation of information and the co-optation, that's a good, I haven't heard that word before, of the elites. That's certainly a 21st century take on, the problems that we are in the midst of here. Is dystopian literature from the 20th century savvy enough to speak to that?
So let me make a case now for Aldous Huxley.
Go ahead.
So Brave New World makes a lot of sense with what you just read from David Frum's piece in the Atlantic. But why are the ordinary people in Brave New World okay with a repressive kleptocracy and with the authoritarian regime around them? Because of sensation, because they go to the feelies, right? What's our version of the feelies? It's our phones. It's our kind of
reality
virtual
sets.
reality. It's our passive consumption and material comfort.
Amusing ourselves to death.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
The postman remains very relevant, I think. But the idea here is that we're okay with all that because we can, with outrage, bang away on our $800 phones about it. But that kind of lulls us, I think, into a state where these sorts of tendencies can take place.
Which is why, among other things, it's a good thing that people are reading books, whether they help you with the current situation or
Absolutely.
not. Because any time spent reading books is time not spent on social media or buying stuff.
Yeah.
Unless you're
which
reading
I
it on
think-
your phone.
Even
But
then,
even that's
it's a
okay.
different rhythm, yes.
No,
So
see, I don't think it is.
it's all right.
I've given up all technology between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. for Lent. Okay? And so I'm in the middle of this.
You're looking pure.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's the makeup. I'm in the middle of this fantastic Japanese epic murder novel called 6-4. I'm halfway through, and I've put it down for the next 40 days because I'm only reading it on my phone. And I'm reading Graham Greene right now. I'm reading physical books. There is something actually. We're embodied selves,
I'm
right?
actually
There's
less
something
pure than
physical about it.
No, I like books, but I read, and the phones are too irritating for me because the screen is too small. But I can read on an iPad. I do think that the rhythm of reading on something of reasonable size, even if a physical book is the best thing, it's still better than the constant chirping of
Agreed.
tweets.
Yeah, it's slowing
and
down.
and the frivolity and narcissism of Facebook. It would. To understand it, though, the books may not be the best place. I think that for people, the kind of people who are watching this show, who read books, to understand how Trump can be in power and how he can still have a fan base when what he's saying is so obviously false to us, you have to turn to other media, starting with reality TV, to understand why the kind of people who like Donald Trump. You have to look at Duck Nation or whatever it's called. You have to find reruns
Dynasty?
of
Duck
Dynasty, that's it. Honey Boo Boo. This is a whole different way of thinking, and I think one of the reasons that people who do read books are so gobsmacked by Trump's election and by his cabinet is we have no understanding of people who think like this, unless we're related to them.
So I think if I could build off that very good point, which I fully agree with, there are very good books that I would recommend, frankly, in place of reading Huxley, Orwell et al. For kind of Trumpian reasons. No. I would read J.D. Vance's Hillbilly Elegy.
Oh, yeah.
I would read Charles Murray's Coming Apart. I would read the most recent issue of Commentary has a great essay by Nicholas Eberstadt that basically speaks to what he calls people in the bubble. That includes us, right? And it's basically a hard economic analysis of lower middle class America.
Nick was on this program last night talking about that.
You're kidding.
No, I kid you not. Good
Well,
timing. It
Yeah,
was
no
good
kidding.
timing.
It's a very good essay. But that's the kind of, I think, thoughtful reading away from the chirp that we should be doing. I read Hillbilly Elegy back in the fall when it came onto everyone's radar because of the election. And I was amazed to kind of explore the lives of people far beyond us who feel kind of left behind in a globalized economy, feel outraged and belittled for their beliefs and their practices. And they're turning, for lack of a better option, to someone that they think is going to
But I
Yes.
hate to tell you,
Yes.
I do have to hate to tell you. I don't know how old you are, but you're a woman of a certain age
Yes.
and of a certain education.
Yes.
And most people like you in the United States voted for Donald Trump.
Because they thought it was in their self-interest. This is why I think the book that I actually turned to after the election was Catch-22, which suddenly, in this world of alternative facts, it made more sense than it used to. I think that 1984 and Brave New World are always worth rereading, but they're not good models. Or another one.
Not good models for now?
For now, because the dissidents will always lose. These are completely controlled worlds. Winston Smith loses. In Brave New World, the dissident ends up hanging himself because they're under constant surveillance and because the authorities are really smart. So that induces despair, as does another one that I recommend, sort of related to what Randy says, E.M. Forster's novella, The Machine Stops, where the world is, people are completely dependent on machines who provide all of their physical needs, and the machines start to wind down. If you've ever considered getting a smart house, read The Machine Stops first. But it does give you a sense that Donald Trump doesn't seem to have of how complicated and interconnected our world is, and that's a good thing to remember.
In our last minute, I want one more recommendation from you. We've talked about how maybe 1984, in Sue Ann's view, is not the book to read at this moment to appreciate the dystopian nature of our times. What would you suggest instead?
I would say probably Coming Apart by Charles Murray, but then forget it all and read Elena Ferrante. Read the Neapolitan Quartet, those 4 novels about 2 poor girls growing up in Italy in the 1950s. Literature should be a place of repose and of recalibration, to kind of leave aside the loud, hard world for a moment, and then you'll be refreshed and reanimated, your imaginative sympathy re-engaged to return into this world of ours.
For that, I would turn to a novel by a Canadian, and I'm not sure how to pronounce her name. It's Emily St. John, or possibly St. John Mandel, Station 11, which is in part about a post-apocalyptic world.
Yes.
But it's a very Canadian post-apocalyptic world where people, most of them, not all, are trying to do their best and to rebuild society, and they're in a traveling theater troupe. Also, to understand where we are now, Gary Trudeau's Huge. His cartoons of Trump starting more than 30 years ago when Trump was just another New York slumlord.
That's a tremendous recommendation.
He is a guy who gets Trump. I wish I'd paid more attention 30 years ago.
Well, we can always do it now. And who knows, this crisis of our times may actually save the book. Maybe not newspapers, hard newspapers anyway, but the book maybe. Randy, Boyagoda, Sue Ann, Kelman, great to have you both here at TVO with us tonight. Thanks so much.
Thank
you, Steve.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.